The morning didn't start with an alarm clock in 1955. It started with the sun soft and golden, streaming through white lace curtains, and with the kettle on the stove letting out a gentle hiss before it whistled. Back then, it was the sounds and smells that roused you from sleep, not vibrations on a nightstand or electronic beeps. Dad was usually up first. You'd hear the muffled creak of floorboards under his slippers as he made his way to the kitchen. By the time you opened your eyes, the house already smelled of Maxwell House coffee, brewed in a percolator that hissed and bubbled like it was doing something sacred. And in a way it was. Mom moved with a kind of quiet grace, her hair already pinned, her house dress starched. She always seemed to know what time it was without looking at a clock. She folded back the covers with cool hands, kissed your forehead, and whispered something like, "Rise and shine, sweetheart." The day's waiting. The radio played softly on the kitchen counter. Not music, not yet. Just a calm, steady voice, reading the headlines, foreign affairs, in distant places that didn't yet concern your young mind. You were far more interested in whether there'd be pancakes or eggs that morning. Maybe even cinnamon toast, if you were lucky. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. One of those old rounded models, with a chrome handle you had to pull with both hands. It was usually stocked with glass bottles of milk from the delivery man, each capped with a paper seal you'd stab with your finger just for fun. Sometimes a small wedge of cheddar or leftover meatloaf sat wrapped in wax paper on the middle shelf. Breakfast was never rushed. Even when it was simple cornflakes with sliced banana and milk, it felt like a meal. Dad would sit at the table newspaper, unfolded like a sail, his glasses slipping halfway down his nose. He'd hum under his breath, usually a Sinatra tune or Perry Como, while sipping from a thick ceramic mug that read, "World's Best Dad," long before such things came from gift shops. In the backyard, the dew still clung to blades of grass, and birds flitted along the clothesline. If it was spring, the lilac bush outside the window sent in its scent like a quiet offering. And in the distance, you might hear the putter of a lawnmower starting, or the slap of a screen door from the house next door. Mom moved between stove and table spatula in hand, making sure nobody's eggs were too runny or too firm. She didn't need a recipe book for anything. Everything she made came from memory passed down from a time when measurements were done by eye and instinct. She wore an apron with a single embroidered pocket that always had a tissue, a button, or a clothespin tucked inside. The kitchen walls were yellow, not bright, but soft like butter. A small clock ticked on the wall above the spice rack. Everything had a place, and everything had a use. There was no clutter, no devices buzzing or blinking. Just the quiet rhythm of family life, like the ticking of that kitchen clock, steady and sure. Outside, the mailman walked his daily route, swinging his leather satchel as he whistled a familiar tune. You might wave to him through the window, and he'd tip his cap in return. He knew your name and your dog's name, too. That was how it was. People didn't just work jobs. They were part of the neighborhood, stitched into its fabric. Sometimes, Dad would glance up from his paper and read aloud a headline. "Looks like rain on Thursday or another rocket test out in New Mexico." And Mom, without looking up from the pan, would answer, "Well, I'd better take the wash off the line before then." And you, still in your pajamas, would just sit and watch. Watch how the morning unfolded, not in a hurry, but in rhythm, like a slow waltz. You didn't know it then, but those were the moments that would stay. The warmth of the kitchen, the scrape of the toast, the laughter over orange juice, and the hum of a house that loved you. In that quiet corner of America, in that kitchen that smelled of eggs and wood polish, the day had begun. Not with a bang, not with urgency, but with the slow unfolding of something ordinary, and in that ordinariness, something beautiful. After breakfast, the world outside began to stir, not in a rush, not in noise, but in quiet familiarity. The sun hung low, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks. There was a peace to it all, as if every house agreed to start the day at its own pace. The street wasn't just a passageway, it was a stage for everyday life. You knew each driveway, each front porch, and who belonged to which stoop. The Miller boys lived 2 doors down, always riding their bikes in a noisy pair. Across the street was Mrs. Delaney, who wore a blue housecoat and watered her begonias every morning at 8:30 sharp. She waved with the same hand that held the hose, and if she liked you enough, she'd call you darlin'. People didn't lock their front doors. They didn't need to. Trust wasn't something you earned. It was something you started with. If someone knocked, it wasn't for a package or a promotion. It was for pie or coffee or to return a borrowed lawn rake. The mailboxes were metal and creaky, mounted beside the door with hand-painted names, the Thompsons, the Reyes family, John and Elaine. Each house had a story. The Smiths had moved from Illinois and brought with them a black and white TV the size of a suitcase. The Langfords had twin girls who always dressed the same even on Tuesdays. And old Mr. Chambers, a retired school principal, still mowed his lawn in a tie and slacks. Standards, he said once with a wink. Front porches were more than decoration. They were living rooms without walls. Wicker chairs, rockers, sometimes a swing hanging by chains that squeaked with every sway. In the evenings, that's where the grown-ups sat. They'd sip iced tea or pour a dash of bourbon over ice while the kids played in the yard, catching lightning bugs in jelly jars. But in the morning, the sidewalks belonged to walkers, the quiet kind. Men heading to catch the streetcar women with shopping baskets walking to the corner grocer. You'd hear their steps before you saw them. The tap-tap of sensible shoes, the jingle of keys in a coat pocket. Then there were the paper boys, always in a hurry, always on time. They rode their bikes like they were chasing something important. Rolled up newspapers thudded against porches, and sometimes missed landing in rose bushes or puddles. If they saw you watching, they'd tip their cap or call morning ma'am, even if you were just a kid in pajamas. The heart of the neighborhood was the corner store, small, dimly lit, but full of wonder. Glass jars of lemon drops, candy, buttons, licorice wheels that dyed your tongue red. The man behind the counter knew your parents and your birthday. He'd give you an extra gumdrop if you remembered your manners. Beside the store was the barber shop. A red and white pole turned slowly in the window, spinning memories into motion. Inside, the chairs were big and leather-bound, the kind that smelled of aftershave and talcum powder. Conversations swirled in the air like pipe smoke baseball scores. Eisenhower's latest speech, local gossip, about who just bought a new Chevrolet. If you kept walking, you'd pass the school, the bell not yet ringing, but the windows already open to catch the breeze. The flag waved gently in front, and in the alley behind it, a stray dog lounged in the shade tail, thumping lazily against the pavement. You knew that dog. Everyone did. He had no name, but every kid fed him half a sandwich at some point. He was ours. The neighborhood had a sound all its own. Not just birds or footsteps, but screen doors, slamming sprinklers, ticking the clang of a bike dropped on the driveway, the ding of an ice cream truck bell somewhere in the distance. These were not background noises. They were the music of living. And the people, they noticed things. If you scraped your knee, someone had a Band-Aid. If your ball flew into a neighbor's yard, you were expected to walk over, say, "Excuse me," and retrieve it with respect. That was the rhythm of the place. Everyone watched out for everyone else, but no one was nosy. They just cared. And somehow you knew it. You could feel the town breathing. It wasn't fast. It didn't buzz. It hummed a steady, comforting hum, like the sound of a fan in summer, or a grandfather's slow whistle while working in the garage. That was the beat of the neighborhood, and it stayed with you long after you left. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might hear it again. If you listened closely, really listened, the town spoke. Not in the way cities speak, now with honking horns and pulsing screens, but in gentle layers of sound, each one telling you exactly what time it was where you were and who might be around the corner. At 7 in the morning, the town woke like an old dog stretching in the sun. The church bells tolled, once soft and rounded, drifting across rooftops like incense. Not urgent, just there. A reminder that time was passing but not slipping away. You might hear the rumble of a delivery truck from the bakery tires crunching over gravel, the scent of yeast and warm flour trailing behind like a promise. Inside, behind the wide front window, fogged with heat racks of golden loaves, cooled beside pies still steaming, and trays of jelly donuts, waited patiently for the first customers to push open the door. Across the street, the town diner flicked on its neon sign with a buzz that tickled the quiet. Inside, spatulas danced on hot griddles, bacon snapped, and coffee pots hissed under the steady hands of waitresses who knew your order before you sat down. The bell above the door jingled with every arrival, a sound as familiar as your own name. The rhythm of the town was measured in footsteps. A man walking to the bank in polished shoes. A woman heading to the post office, heels clicking on pavement. A boy in canvas sneakers, chasing a friend. Laughter echoing off the brick wall of the five and dime. Even the air had a different sound to it, thinner, cleaner, carrying the rustle of elm leaves and the lazy drone of bees. At midday, the heat softened the edges of everything. Doors were propped open with wedges of wood. Fans turned in barber shops and hardware stores with a low whir lifting the corners of newspapers and skirts alike. And then came the train. It didn't need to blow its whistle for you to know it was coming. First came the hum, like a cello warming up. Then the vibration in the ground, subtle but undeniable. And finally, the long, lonesome horn, low and deep, slicing through the day like memory through silence. The train ran straight through the heart of town on rusted tracks that crossed Main Street with no warning lights. Only a wooden barrier that creaked down as if reluctant to interfere. Kids would run to the crossing counting boxcars and waving at the engineer who always waved back. That sound, the steady clack-clack of metal on track, was a lullaby in motion even in daylight. And then quiet again. Not silence, no. The sound of a small town was never silent. It was filled with the familiar, a dog barking 3 doors down, the squeak of a clothesline pulley, the pop of a soda bottle opened with a church key, the slap of a baseball glove in the backyard, and the radios, those glorious radios. Big wooden boxes with golden knobs and warm lights. They played the voices of the Andrews sisters, Nat King Cole, and sometimes the news spoken with crisp diction and gravitas. The radio wasn't background noise. It was a companion. Families listened together, not while doing chores or scrolling, but truly listened, leaning in, sharing silence between songs. That kind of listening doesn't exist much anymore. Some homes had pianos, and you could sometimes hear one playing in the late afternoon drifting from an open window. Not perfectly, not professionally, but beautifully. A teenager practicing scales, a mother playing a hymn, a grandfather plunking out a tune he'd carried home from the war. Even the mechanical things had soul. The rattle of the washing machine on the back porch, the crank of the ice cream maker, the slap of a screen door, the universal punctuation mark of American summer. And in the evening, the crickets began. Soft at first, then louder, until they became a blanket of sound that covered every lawn and fence post. Porch swings creaked in rhythm. Conversations hushed, and the world seemed to inhale slowly, preparing for night. There was a comfort in those sounds. They marked the hours, but never demanded them. They were not interruptions. They were invitations. Invitations to pause, to notice, to remember that you belonged somewhere. Because in the 1950s, you didn't need a soundtrack to feel something. The town already had one. And if you sat quietly long enough, it would play for you again and again. School in the 1950s wasn't just about books. It was about structure, respect, and the small rituals that shaped your character. The bell didn't just call you to class, it called you into community. Mornings began with the sound of sneakers and saddle shoes on polished linoleum. Hallways echoed with laughter, giggles, and the occasional reprimand from a teacher who knew every child's name and their parents' names too. The walls were lined with American flags, bulletin boards dressed in construction paper, and hand-lettered posters reminding you to be kind, sit up straight, and do your best. Classrooms were orderly. The desks were wooden, with inkwells still carved into the tops, even if no one used them anymore. You'd keep your pencils in a small cigar box or metal tin. Your books were wrapped in brown paper grocery bags, turned inside out, decorated with doodles, and your name in block letters. There was no iPad, no smartboard, just a chalkboard, a pointer, stick, and a globe that spun with a satisfying creak. Every day started the same. You stood tall, with your right hand over your heart, facing the flag, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in unison. There was a rhythm to it, familiar, steady, like the town itself. Teachers didn't just teach, they raised you alongside your parents. Miss Hargrave, with her beehive hair and powdery perfume, taught cursive like it was a sacred art. Mr. Jenkins told stories of Gettysburg so vividly you could smell the smoke. They ruled with fairness and clarity, and if you acted out, your mother would know about it before you walked through the front door. Recess was freedom in motion. Girls played jump rope, chanting songs with rhythms that lived in your bones. Boys played marbles or flipped baseball cards, arguing over who had the better Mickey mantle. Hopscotch was drawn in thick chalk, and the jungle gym was a fortress. There were no safety mats. You fell, you got scraped, you got up. Lunch was eaten in a cafeteria that smelled of tomato soup and wax paper. You brought your lunch from home, usually a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a thermos with a little metal cup screwed on top. Sometimes a handwritten note was tucked inside, "Eat all your sandwich. Love, Mom." And when the final bell rang, the town shifted gears again. Kids poured out onto the sidewalks like marbles out of a jar, heading home, or to the library, or to piano lessons in the church basement. Backpacks didn't exist, just books hugged tight to your chest or carried with a strap. And if you were lucky, you'd stop by the soda fountain for a cherry phosphate and a round of checkers. But if school was a place to grow, Sunday was a day to reflect. Sunday morning had its own sound. Church bells ringing clear and proud, the squeak of polished shoes on front porches, the rustle of starched dresses, and the gentle click of rosary beads or tie clips. Getting ready was an event. Boys combed their hair with water and a little dab of Brill cream. Girls wore white gloves and dresses with lace collars. Mothers applied lipstick in the mirror, checking hats at just the right angle. Fathers buttoned starched shirts and tied Windsor knots while humming hymns from memory. Church was not just the building, it was the heart of the town. Rows of pews held generations. You sat beside your grandparents and behind your teachers. The same people who stood behind the counter at the hardware store were now bowing their heads beside you. The pastor spoke in a measured tone, calm, assured, but passionate when it mattered. The organ filled the space with waves of sound that wrapped around you like a familiar blanket. Hymns were sung with strength, sometimes off-key, but never without heart. Children fidgeted. Parents gave gentle nudges. Ushers passed the plate, and heads bowed in prayer. There was a comfort in the repetition, the ritual, the shared silence. It reminded you that life had seasons, and each one brought its own lesson. After church came the best kind of feast. Not fancy, but full. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, string beans cooked soft, with a slab of salt pork, apple pie cooling on the sill, sweet tea in mason jars. Meals didn't happen in a hurry. They stretched, they lingered, they mattered. Sundays were for visits, for grandparents and cousins and stories told from a favorite armchair, for porch sitting second helpings and falling asleep to the sound of grown-ups talking about things you didn't yet understand. And by evening, as the sun lowered behind the maple trees and the sky turned the color of memory, you'd lay out your clothes for Monday, your shoes polished, your book bag packed, and your heart quietly full. You might not have known it then, but school and Sunday taught you the same thing. There was a time for effort and a time for grace, and both were sacred. Summer in the 1950s had a flavor all its own. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't scheduled. It just unfolded day by day, hour by hour, until you found yourself barefoot on the front lawn chasing fireflies with a jelly jar and forgetting the word bored even existed. The days were hot, but they ended softly. The kind of soft that makes you slow your steps and breathe a little deeper. You could smell cut grass, still damp from sprinklers. You could hear the pop of a screen door as someone stepped out with a cold bottle of Coca-Cola and sat on the stoop like it was their throne. Supper would come just after sunset. Light meals, maybe sandwiches and sliced tomatoes or deviled eggs with pickles on the side. Sometimes there was icebox cake or a slice of watermelon with salt sprinkled on top, juice dripping down your chin as you leaned over the grass. And then the magic hours would begin. The street lights flickered on, casting halos onto the sidewalk. Kids emerged again, barefoot, sun-kissed, and full of energy. We played kick the can hide and seek, or just sat on the curb with bubble gum and baseball cards, trading doubles and arguing over stats. There were no cell phones to check, no notifications, only the laughter of friends and the call of a mother's voice when it was time to come in. Radios played softly from open windows, Elvis, Buddy Holly, the Platters. Music floated on the breeze like it was part of the night itself. Teenagers leaned on parked cars, twisting dials, trying to catch a station from 3 towns over. And if a slow song came on, someone might dance in the driveway just for the joy of it. But the real thrill came with the drive-in. Going to the drive-in wasn't just watching a movie. It was an event, a ritual. Families packed into station wagons and sedans, pillows in the back seat, popcorn in paper sacks, soda in glass bottles that clinked together under the seats. You could smell the exhaust of the car in front and the butter from the snack bar all at once, and it somehow smelled right. You paid by the carload, not by the head. The attendant wore a cap and gave you a slip to hang from your rearview mirror. Then you found your spot, slightly tilted to face the giant screen that stood like a moonlit cathedral at the far end of the lot. The speaker box was metal and scratchy, hanging from a short pole. You rolled down your window, hooked it onto the edge, and adjusted the little volume knob that never quite worked. The audio was tinny, the pictures sometimes grainy, but no one complained. That flickering black and white film against the summer sky was magic. Kids sat in pajamas in the back of the car or stretched out on blankets laid across the hood. Parents leaned back, arms behind heads, occasionally checking the rearview mirror to make sure nobody was sneaking in under a blanket. The movie didn't always matter. Sometimes it was a Western, sometimes a comedy. But what stayed with you wasn't the plot. It was the feel of it. The stars overhead. The taste of popcorn. The warm air on your skin. And the laughter from a nearby car. That was what you remembered. And when the movie ended, usually after a second feature, it was nearly midnight. Engines coughed to life one by one. Headlights lit up like fireflies on the move. You'd drift off in the back seat on the way home. The road humming beneath the tires. The credits of the night still rolling somewhere in your mind. Back in bed, windows open to the night, you could hear a dog bark once in the distance. Maybe a train far off. Or just the crickets still singing. And you'd smile in your sleep knowing tomorrow would bring more of the same sunshine, laughter, and the quiet certainty that life was exactly where it needed to be. There comes a time, often on a quiet afternoon, maybe with a cup of coffee in hand, when you look back, not to escape, but to understand. And as the memories return, in layers soft and golden, you begin to realize the truth. Those years gave you more than days. They gave you principles. The 1950s weren't perfect, but they taught a kind of steadiness the world seems to miss now. A sense that each day had a place and every person had a role. The milkman wasn't just a delivery man. He was someone your family waved to each morning. Your teacher wasn't a stranger paid to instruct. She was a trusted guide, part of your life. And your word, it meant something. You learned to shake hands firmly, to look people in the eye, to write thank you notes. You learned how to wait, because not everything came fast, and that was okay. You waited for photographs to be developed. You waited for Christmas catalogs in the mail. You waited for love, for letters, for Jell-O to set. And in the waiting, you found appreciation. We built things slowly, then homes, friendships, reputations. A good neighbor wasn't defined by proximity, but by presence. He helped you fix a fence, lent you a tool, and brought over a pie when your mother was sick. And in return, you did the same without keeping score. There were no manuals on parenting, no seminars on gratitude, but somehow lessons were passed on over the dinner table, on long walks through shared silence on porch swings. You were taught to hold doors, to return what you borrowed, and to stand up when someone older walked into the room. Hard work wasn't admired, it was expected. A man was judged not by the shine of his shoes, but by the dust on his boots. A woman by her warmth, her resolve, her ability to make a house feel like a home, even on a tight budget. And children, they knew their place in the family was not just to receive, but to witness and to carry forward. What did we carry? The smell of bread baking on a Saturday morning. The way your dad folded the Sunday paper just so. The hush of a room during prayer. The thrill of a new pair of shoes bought with saved-up allowance. The first time someone let you drive the car down a quiet road. We carried stories. And now, in the quiet of our later years, we realize those stories were never small. They were anchors. Maybe that's why the old family photo album matters more now than it did then. Each page holds a memory, not just of faces and fashion, but of values. In a black and white snapshot of a boy with a kite, you see freedom. In the candid smile of your mother at the sink, you see resilience. The 1950s left behind more than cars with tail fins and jukeboxes. They left behind blueprints for a life lived full and honest. They taught us that routine could be sacred, that simplicity didn't mean lack, and that even the smallest rituals, morning coffee and evening walk, could become lifelong treasures. Now, when we hear the distant hum of an old song on the radio, or see a child playing jump rope on a city sidewalk, something stirs. Memory, yes, but also a kind of promise that some things don't disappear. They settle, they root, they bloom again in the way we speak, the way we love, the way we remember. We carry the 1950s not because we must, but because we want to, because, in its quiet, rhythmic beauty, it reminds us of who we were, and perhaps who we still are underneath the noise. So, if you find yourself on a porch one evening with the light turning amber and the breeze whispering through the trees, sit a while, close your eyes, listen. You might just hear the past pulling up a chair beside you. And if you do, smile, because it never truly left. It wasn't until years later, maybe while cleaning out the attic or stepping into a long-forgotten garage, that we realized how many little things had vanished from our lives. A rotary phone with its slow, satisfying click, click, click as you dialed each number. That sound alone could fill a room, could make a child stand still with awe. And waiting for the dial to return was part of the call. No speed, no shortcuts. You made each number count. Or the icebox, really an icebox. Before the name was borrowed by the refrigerator, a man used to deliver blocks of ice in leather gloves, placing them carefully into the top compartment. You'd hear the ice crack as it met the warm air, a sound so clean it made you shiver even in July. There were other things too. The tick of a wind-up alarm clock, the scratchy pages of a Sears catalog thick enough to press wildflowers, milk bottles with foil caps, embroidered handkerchiefs, shoe polish kits, glass ashtrays with hotel logos even in homes where nobody smoked. And then there were the words, the manners that slowly slipped from use. Beg your pardon. May I, ma'am? Sir. Company's coming tidy the porch. These phrases once lived in every hallway, every kitchen, every supper table. They carried the weight of custom, not ceremony. They were part of the fabric. You didn't need much. A good winter coat passed down and patched. A simple toolbox. A stack of records next to the turntable, each with a crease in the sleeve that told you it had been played often and with care. Some families had a set of encyclopedias, leather-bound, gold-edged, filling an entire shelf. Children would pull one down at random, running fingers across maps reading about countries they'd never see, kings they'd never meet, inventions that sounded like magic. The front porch swing, with its squeaky chain and soft pillow, slowly vanished from neighborhoods. Television moved indoors. Air conditioning pulled families off the stoop and behind glass. We didn't notice right away, but the streets grew quieter. The radio cabinet, once the focal point of the living room, was replaced by something louder, flashier, yet somehow colder. The old knobs, the amber backlight, the way the music drifted rather than boomed. It's hard to explain that kind of magic to someone who never felt it. We didn't leave these things behind all at once. They faded, a drawer not opened, not. A sound not heard, a smell not smelled in years. Until one day, we saw a photo or touched a button, and time folded in on itself. And there we were again, sitting on the floor tying skates with leather laces, watching our mother roll out pie crust with a wooden pin that never saw a dishwasher, listening to the click of Dad's Zippo lighter as he bent over the Sunday paper. Memory doesn't announce its return. It arrives in whispers, in the feel of a certain fabric, the color of a tin lunchbox, the smell of sun-warmed wood. Sometimes in a thrift store, we'd see something familiar, a Bakelite radio, a stack of yellowed recipe cards, a box of costume jewelry, and for a moment we'd stand perfectly still, because in our minds the room changed. The wallpaper returned. The voices filled the space again. The music began to play, and just like that, we were home. It had been decades since I'd last turned down that road, the one that curved just right before the water tower came into view. The old town hadn't vanished, not entirely. It had simply grown quieter, like an old friend who didn't mind the silence anymore. The trees were taller now, arching over the streets like watchful sentries. The sidewalks were cracked in new places, but they still held the same rhythm beneath my feet. I parked the car in front of the house where I'd grown up, and for a moment just sat, breathing, remembering. The house wasn't ours anymore, but the porch still creaked in the same spot when I stepped up. I half expected my father's voice to call out from inside, or my mother to appear at the screen door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. But the door stayed closed, and the only sound was the wind rustling the leaves and the faint hum of a lawnmower 2 streets over. The town had changed but gently. The old barber shop was now a coffee place with chalkboard menus. The hardware store had been turned into an antique shop, which somehow felt like poetry. And the drugstore, still there, still with a red and white awning. The soda fountain long gone, but the tile floor still held the same pattern black and white diamonds like little anchors to the past. I walked the block like I used to when I was 10, dragging a stick along fences, watching my own shadow move beside me. Some houses had fresh paint. Others looked a little tired. But the bones were the same. The spirit of the place hadn't left. And then I saw her, Mrs. Delaney, sitting on her porch, the same blue housecoat, the same tidy garden, though smaller now. Her hair was white and her shoulders stooped, but when I waved, she smiled. Not just with her mouth, but with the whole of her memory. "Well, I'll be," she said, standing slowly. "Is that?" "It's me," I said, almost shy, "from number 16, the kid who used to steal your daisies." She laughed, and the years dropped away like summer rain. We talked for a while, the way old neighbors do, threading stories with pauses, filling silences with knowing looks. She remembered my dog's name. I remembered her lemon bars. Time hadn't taken those details. It had polished them. Later, I walked to the schoolyard. The swings were new, the slide taller, but the field was still there. I could still see the chalk lines from long forgotten kickball games. And beneath the oak tree, at the edge of the lot, initials carved into bark had faded but not vanished. And then, as if on cue, the church bells rang. Not loudly, not urgently, just the way they used to marking time for a town that didn't need a hurry. It was then I realized you never truly leave a place that raised you. It stays tucked inside, waiting patiently, not to haunt you, but to steady you, to remind you that life had a beginning that was soft, simple, and good. I left that day with no souvenirs, no postcards, just the sound of the gravel under my tires as I pulled away, and the quiet knowledge that something sacred still lived on those streets. Not just the past, but me. They sit quietly now, these old objects, on mantels and cedar chests, on the top shelves of closets. You might pass them 100 times in a year without stopping. But when you do, when you finally hold them again, it's like a photograph you can touch. A fountain pen, still heavy in the hand, even though it ran dry 50 years ago. Its cap worn, where Dad used to twist it off with a thumb stained faintly blue. He signed every Christmas card with it, every check for the electric bill. And once a love letter we found years later, folded neatly, still smelling faintly of Old Spice and cedar drawers. A lace handkerchief, frayed at the corners, yellowed with age. It once lived in your mother's purse, tucked beside spearmint gum and bobby pins. She never left the house without it. She waved it from train platforms, tied it around bruised knees, and pressed it to her mouth when the news came from overseas. Then there's the pocket knife, just a simple bone-handled one, dull now, but still folding smooth. It lived in a grandfather's pocket for 40 years, opened envelopes, whittled pine, cut twine for the garden, and when he passed, it was handed down, not with fanfare, just with the words, "You'll know when to use it." Each object holds 1,000 moments. The snow globe from a trip to Niagara Falls, the ticket stub from the very first movie you saw as a teenager, Cary Grant, and a stolen kiss behind the drive-in fog. The Christmas ornament, shaped like a pine cone, still dusted with glitter from a tree that stood in a living room now long gone. Sometimes it's a book, the spine-cracked pages marked in the margin by a parent's careful pencil, or a quilt patched and threadbare, stitched together from Sunday dresses and old shirts that no longer fit anyone but still hold warmth. These things aren't valuable, not in the way the world measures value. No one puts them in a safe, but we guard them just the same because they carry the weight of people we've lost and places we've left. They are memory made visible, touch made permanent. Even the sounds they make are part of the past. The click of a Zippo lighter, the clink of ice in a tall glass on a screened porch, the snap of a Polaroid camera, the hollow thunk of a leather baseball glove catching a ball just right. These are the artifacts, not of history books, but of real life. And oh, the letters, tied with ribbon, faded to sepia, some in envelopes, others folded over themselves. You find them in boxes you thought were long forgotten, and suddenly you're 22 again, reading your name in someone else's handwriting. My dearest, darling, I miss you more each day. Sometimes they're never sent. Sometimes they're never opened. But they exist. And in that existence, they carry an era, a slower time, when love was penned, not typed. When you waited days for a reply, and the arrival of a letter was an event. These objects are not the past. They are its voice. And as long as we keep them tucked away, passed down, held gently in the hand, we carry more than things. We carry people. We carry values. We carry echoes of a country that once moved to a different rhythm. Not better, not worse, just quieter, more human. So next time you find yourself holding a locket or a pair of baby shoes or a wedding photo in black and white, pause. Let it speak. Let it take you back, because it will. The porch is quieter now. Not silent, not empty, just quieter. The kind of quiet that settles when the day is full, when you've walked your share of roads and have finally come home. And on this porch, in the fading golden light of late afternoon, the past and present sit side by side like old friends. There's still a swing here, new chains, fresh paint. But when it creaks, it does so in the same rhythm as before. The wood beneath your hand is smooth from years of touch, a place once polished by the hands of your parents and their parents before them. In the distance, you hear a lawnmower, a child's laugh, a bird call you can't quite name, but remember all the same. These sounds are familiar if you let them be. You sip coffee now, not from a thermos, but from a thick ceramic mug. There's no newspaper folded beside you, just a phone screen face down. You're not interested in what's trending. You're interested in what endures. Sometimes a grandchild visits. They sit on this very step, swinging their legs like you once did, and they ask, What was it like? And you pause, not because you've forgotten, but because you want to get it right. Because how do you describe the warmth of a world that didn't glow from screens, but from hearts? How do you explain the magic of a summer night when the only thing on your mind was catching fireflies or making it home before the streetlights came on? So you tell them a story about the milkman who knew your name, about Sunday potlucks and drive-in movies, about how people once sat on porches not to escape the world, but to be part of it. You tell them that things weren't always easy, but they were slower, and in the slowness, there was depth. Conversations that lasted hours, friendships that lasted lifetimes, silences that weren't empty, but full of understanding. You speak not with nostalgia, but with love, because the past isn't a place you live in, it's a place that lives in you. And as the shadows stretch across the yard, you realize this porch has held generations. It has heard laughter, witnessed grief, and cradled moments too quiet for words. And now it holds you. Older now, wiser maybe, quieter certainly, but still here. And as you sit, you realize something deeper, still, that the rhythm of life hasn't disappeared. It's just buried beneath the noise of modernity, waiting to be uncovered. It lives in slow mornings, in handwritten notes, in shared meals and quiet walks. It lives in porches. And as the wind moves gently through the trees and the light grows soft, you close your eyes, not to sleep, but to remember, to listen. Because sometimes the most beautiful moments aren't the ones we chase. They're the ones that come back to find us.